I knew something was wrong the second I walked into that interview, but I couldn't explain it. The interviewer looked at me like they'd already made up their mind. They were asking questions that didn't make sense, like they already knew something about me that I never said. By the time it ended, I wasn't just nervous, I was confused. I sat in my car replaying everything, thinking, how did this go so wrong? Then later that night, my mother-in-law called me. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, asking how it went, like she was waiting for a specific answer. That's when the feeling hit me. Something wasn't right. But I ignored it. I told myself I was just overthinking. I mean, accusing your own family of something like that? That sounds insane. But 3 months later, I walked into a building I was never supposed to be in. And the moment she saw me, she didn't say a word. Before I take you back to the beginning, if this story hits close to home, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if you genuinely connect with it. Drop your location and your local time in the comments. I love knowing where you're listening from. My name is Morgan Ellis, 31 years old, born and raised in Charlotte, North Carolina, in a house where my mother worked double shifts at a hospital and my father drove trucks across state lines 6 days a week. We weren't rich, we weren't struggling, we were the kind of family where you learned early that nobody was going to hand you anything. And if you wanted something, you worked until your hands hurt, and then you worked a little more after that. That's how I was built. So when I tell you I had worked for everything I had, I need you to understand I mean that in the truest, most bone-deep way possible. Every promotion, every certification, every reference letter I ever collected, I earned it, quietly, without drama, without needing anyone to notice. I had been in operations and logistics for 7 years by the time any of this happened. Started as an office coordinator right out of college, worked my way up to a senior analyst role at a supply chain firm in Charlotte, and by 29, I was managing a team of 11 people and overseeing a regional distribution budget that made my mother cry when I told her the number. I was proud of myself. I don't say that with arrogance. I say it because a girl from the kind of house I grew up in, a girl who watched her mother eat lunch standing up in a hospital break room so she could get back to work faster, doesn't take success lightly. I held mine carefully, like something fragile. And then I met David. David came into my life through a mutual friend at a birthday party in downtown Charlotte. Tall, quiet, funny in that understated way where you don't realize how funny he is until you're already laughing. He worked in civil engineering. He coached youth basketball on Saturday mornings. He called his grandmother every Sunday without fail. I fell in love with him the way you fall asleep, slowly, and then all at once. We dated for 2 years, got engaged on the Outer Banks on a Tuesday evening in October when the beach was empty and the sky looked like something out of a movie. Got married the following spring in a small ceremony that was everything I had ever wanted. Warm, simple, real. What was not simple was his mother. Her name was Diane, and I want you to hold that name because this whole story lives inside it. Diane Marsh was not the kind of woman who was obviously difficult. That's what made her so hard to navigate. She didn't scream. She didn't make scenes. She was polished. She was charming. She was the kind of woman who brought beautifully wrapped gifts and remembered everyone's dietary restrictions and always said the right thing at the right moment. But underneath that, there was something else. David had tried to warn me. Early in our relationship, he sat across from me at dinner and said very carefully, "My mother loves hard, but her version of love comes with conditions. Just be patient with her." I thought I understood what he meant. I didn't. From the very first time I met Diane, I felt it. This invisible measuring that never stopped, like she was running a constant calculation in the background, deciding what I was worth, deciding whether I was the right fit, not for David as a person, but for the life she had designed for him in her head. I tried everything. I was warm, I was respectful, I remembered details she mentioned in passing and brought them up later to show I was listening. I never missed a family event. I never gave her a reason. But there is a specific kind of woman who doesn't need a reason. Diane was that kind of woman. The tension between us was always quiet, never explosive, just this low, steady hum of her reminding me, gently, always gently, that I was a guest in his son's life, that my presence was something she was graciously tolerating rather than genuinely welcoming. And I made the mistake that too many good-hearted women make. I kept trying to change her mind. Now let me tell you about the job. A company called Hartwell Solutions was hiring for a director of operations position. This was not a lateral move. This was the next level, the kind of role that comes with a corner office and a salary that changes the trajectory of your family's life, the kind of role that people spend 10 years positioning themselves for. I had spent exactly 7 years positioning myself for it. I applied in January. By February, I had passed 2 phone screens and a written assessment. By early March, I was invited to a final in-person panel interview, the last stage before an offer decision. I prepared like my life depended on it. 4 weeks of research. I built a full presentation around Hartwell's operational gaps. I memorized their quarterly reports. I rehearsed my answers with David at our kitchen table until he started reciting them back to me from memory. I had my outfit picked out 2 weeks in advance. I knew the names of every person on that panel. The night before the interview, I was nervous, but ready. There's a difference between those two things, and I knew the difference well. I set 2 alarms, laid my blazer across the chair, climbed into bed next to David, who kissed my forehead and said, "They don't know what's about to walk through their door." I smiled, turned off the light, and that should have been the last quiet night before everything went right. Now let me tell you about the job. A company called Hartwell Solutions was hiring for a director of operations position. This was not a lateral move. This was the next level, the kind of role that comes with a corner office and a salary that changes the trajectory of your family's life, the kind of role that people spend 10 years positioning themselves for. I had spent exactly 7 years positioning myself for it. I applied in January. By February, I had passed 2 phone screens and a written assessment. By early March, I was invited to a final in-person panel interview, the last stage before an offer decision. I prepared like my life depended on it. 4 weeks of research. I built a full presentation around Hartwell's operational gaps. I memorized their quarterly reports. I rehearsed my answers with David at our kitchen table until he started reciting them back to me from memory. I had my outfit picked out 2 weeks in advance. I knew the names of every person on that panel. The night before the interview, I was nervous, but ready. There's a difference between those two things, and I knew the difference well. I set 2 alarms, laid my blazer across the chair, climbed into bed next to David, who kissed my forehead and said, "They don't know what's about to walk through their door." I smiled, turned off the light, and that should have been the last quiet night before everything went right. But something was already in motion that I didn't know about yet. The morning of the interview, I was focused, calm. The drive to Hartwell's office was 40 minutes, and I used every minute of it to center myself. I walked into that lobby 12 minutes early, checked in at the front desk, sat down in a chair near the window with my portfolio on my lap. And then I walked into that room. 5 people on the panel, a conference table, water glasses, a projector screen. I shook hands, I smiled, I sat down. And within the first 5 minutes, I felt it. Something was off. The energy in that room was not the energy of people who were open. It was the energy of people who had already decided something and were going through the motions. The lead interviewer, a man named Gerald, kept glancing at a paper in front of him. Not my resume, something separate. And the questions he was asking were strange, indirect, probing in a way that had nothing to do with my qualifications. He asked me about my work ethic, not my experience, my work ethic. He asked me if I had ever had disciplinary action taken against me at a previous employer. He asked me, with a carefully neutral face, whether I had ever had any interpersonal conflicts that escalated to management involvement. I answered every question, calmly, clearly, with specific examples that contradicted every implication behind each one. But I could feel it, the way you feel rain coming before a single drop has fallen. I could feel that this interview had been poisoned before I walked in the door. I did not get the offer. The email came 3 days later. Polite, brief, "We have decided to move in a different direction." I read it standing in my kitchen, and then I just stood there for a long time holding my phone. That same night, Diane called. Her voice was warm, concerned. She asked how the interview had gone. She said she had been thinking about me. She said she hoped I wasn't too disappointed if it didn't work out, because these things happen and there would be other opportunities. And David had mentioned I had been working so hard, and she just wanted me to know she was rooting for me. She said all of this perfectly. And there was something underneath it, this hum, this frequency I couldn't name, that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. I got off the phone and I stood in the hallway and I thought, that was strange. And then I pushed the thought away, because what was I supposed to do with it? Accuse my mother-in-law of sabotaging my interview based on a feeling? Based on the way her voice sounded? That was not a thought I could follow without evidence. That was the kind of thought that tears families apart. So I buried it. And I cried, and I grieved the opportunity, and I got up the next morning and I kept going. But the thought didn't fully disappear. It sat at the back of my mind like a quiet fire. 6 weeks after the interview, I was at David's parents' house for Sunday dinner, the kind of dinner that happened every few months. His parents, his sister Keely, her husband, David, and me around a big oak table that had been in that family since before David was born. I was in the kitchen helping clear plates when I overheard Diane on the back porch. She was on the phone. I wasn't trying to listen. I want to be honest about that. I was stacking dishes by the sink and her voice drifted through the screen door, and I caught just enough to stop me cold. I know Gerald personally. Yes, we go back years. No, I just mentioned some concerns I had heard. I felt it was the responsible thing to do. She's a lovely girl, but I had heard things and I wasn't going to just stay quiet. I set the plate down very carefully. My hands were not shaking. I made sure of that. I walked back to the dining room. I sat down next to David. I smiled at his father, who was telling a story about a fishing trip. I stayed at that table for another 40 minutes, and then we drove home. And in the car, I told David everything.
What happened after that? I need you to stay with me, because this is where it gets complicated in the way real life always does. David did not explode. He did not immediately defend me. He did not immediately defend his mother. He went very, very quiet. And that quiet, that specific silence from a man who always had words, told me that somewhere inside him he wasn't completely surprised. "You knew," I said, not accusatory, almost a whisper. "I didn't know," he said, "but I'm not shocked, and I hate that I'm not shocked." We stayed up until 2 in the morning talking, and I mean talking. The raw, unfiltered, no walls kind of conversation that you can only have with someone you truly trust. I told him how it had felt, the interview, the questions, the phone call after, the back porch, all of it. And David, to his credit, to the deepest credit of the man I married, did not ask me to manage my feelings to protect his relationship with his mother. He called Diane the next morning. I wasn't in the room, but I heard his voice change. I heard the parts where he went quiet. I heard when he said, clearly, without room for interpretation, "What you did was wrong, Mom. It was wrong and it needs to be fixed." Diane denied it. Then she minimized it. Then she said she was only trying to look out for the family because she had heard things about me and she couldn't just stay quiet when her son's future was at stake. There it was. Not an apology, not even close. I want to be honest about the weeks that followed, because I think women especially need to hear this part. I was angry. I am not going to pretend I handled it with grace from the very beginning. I was furious in the way that only comes when someone attacks something you worked for, not just your job, not just your opportunity, but the version of yourself you built from nothing. David and I struggled, not with each other, but around each other. We were careful with our words in a way that exhausted both of us. The guest room saw 3 nights of a husband who didn't know how to exist in the space between his wife and his mother. But David chose. He chose without being asked twice. He told his mother that until she was willing to have an honest conversation and acknowledge what she had done, things between them would be different. She didn't call for 3 weeks. He didn't chase her. And in those 3 weeks, something shifted in our marriage. Not a breaking, but a deepening. The kind of deepening that only comes from watching someone choose you when it costs them something. I started rebuilding. Not emotionally, I mean professionally. I hired a career coach. I updated every reference. I got written letters from 4 managers, 2 directors, a VP. I built a portfolio so thorough that any whisper about my character would look exactly like what it was, a lie standing next to a mountain of truth. I applied to 37 positions over 10 weeks. I was not desperate, I was deliberate. And then, on a Wednesday morning in November, a recruiter called me. Senior Director of Operations, competitive salary, a company with a strong culture and a reputation for promoting from within. The recruiter said my profile had come up as a strong match, and she wanted to know if I was open to having a conversation. I asked the name of the company. She said, Callaway Partners. I wrote it down, thanked her, said I'd love to learn more. Hung up the phone, opened my laptop, and the first thing that came up when I searched Callaway Partners was their leadership team page. I scrolled through the names, and there, under Human Resources, was a name and a face I knew better than I wanted to. Diane Marsh, Vice President of Human Resources, Callaway Partners. I read it 3 times. I closed the laptop, I sat at my kitchen table for a very long time, and then I thought about the parking lot, the Hartwell rejection email, the Sunday dinner back porch, the way Diane's voice had sounded on that phone call, warm, calm, almost satisfied. I opened the laptop again. I called the recruiter back. I said yes.
The panel interview was on a Thursday morning. I walked in wearing a charcoal blazer I had bought specifically for that day. Not because it was expensive, because it was armor, the kind of outfit you put on when you need to remember who you are. I was extraordinary. I don't say that lightly. I say it because the work was extraordinary. The research, the preparation, the 90-day operational improvement plan I had built voluntarily and presented without being asked. I watched the director of operations lean forward in his chair in the way people do when they stop being polite and start being interested. When it was over, one of the panelists walked me to the elevator and said quietly, "I've been on a lot of these panels. Today was different." I thanked him. I took the elevator to the 4th floor. I walked to the door with a gold nameplate next to it. The assistant knocked and opened it, and I walked in. Diane was standing at her window with her back to me, reading something on a tablet. When the door opened, she turned around with her professional expression already in place, the polished, measured Diane Marsh face she had been perfecting for decades. And then she saw me. I watched it happen. The tablet lowered. The expression didn't fall, it dissolved, like a signal that suddenly lost connection. Her mouth opened slightly, not wide, just enough. Her eyes moved, to me, to the door, to me again, doing the math in real time, calculating how I was here, why I was here, what this meant. She knew. She knew I had chosen this, that I had gone through every stage of that process knowing exactly where it ended, that I had sat across from her company's panel and been brilliant, and now I was standing in front of the last door, and she was the one who had to open it. I smiled, not cold, not cruel, just clear. The smile of a woman who had sat in a parking lot and cried and rebuilt herself anyway and walked back into the storm on her own terms. I extended my hand. "Diane," I said, "it's good to see you." Her hand was cold. We sat down. She had my file in front of her, my application, my portfolio, my references, everything, all the work, all the truth, laid out in a neat stack between us. She looked at the papers. She looked at me. For a long moment, neither of us said anything. Then Diane straightened, picked up her pen, and she did her job. She asked me the HR questions in that careful, professional voice. Start date, salary expectations, long-term goals at the company. She was composed, I'll give her that. Whatever was happening inside her, she held it together. I answered every question directly. No tremor, no satisfaction, just clean, clear answers from a woman who had earned the right to be in that room. When the last question was done, she set her pen down. She looked at me, really looked at me, in a way she never had across a dinner table or at a Sunday gathering. This was different. This was one professional looking at another and finally seeing what was actually there. "Your portfolio is impressive," she said, quietly, almost to herself.
"Thank you," I said. A pause. "Can I ask you something off record?" I waited. "Why this company? You have strong options in this market. Why Callaway?" I looked at Diane Marsh, the woman who had picked up a phone and tried to close a door on me, and I said, "Because I don't let other people decide which rooms I belong in." She held my gaze. She didn't look away. She nodded once, very slowly. The offer came on a Monday. David was in the kitchen when I showed him the email. He read it once, looked up at me, and his eyes filled with tears. This man, who had spent months holding both his loyalty to his mother and his love for me, just stood there in our kitchen and cried. He said, "I'm so sorry she did that to you." I said, "I know." He said, "I'm so proud of you." And that was it. That was the moment. Not the offer, not the salary, not Diane's face when I walked in. It was David in our kitchen, choosing me again, openly, without reservation. Diane never mentioned it, not to me, not to David, not at family dinners. It was as if it had never happened, except that it had, and we all knew it, and something quiet and permanent had shifted in the architecture of our family. She doesn't warm to me the way I once spent so many wasted years hoping she would, but when she looks at me now, there is something in her eyes that wasn't there before. It might be respect. It might just be the recognition that she was wrong about what I was made of. Either way, I'll take it. Before I go, I want to say something, and I want to say it carefully because it matters to me that you hear it the right way. If someone in your life, someone who was supposed to be in your corner, has ever used their access to you to hurt you instead, I want you to know that the grief of that is real. It is one of the most disorienting kinds of pain because it doesn't just hurt you. It makes you question your own judgment. It makes you wonder how you missed it. It makes you feel foolish for having trusted. You were not foolish. You were open. You were generous. You extended something that should have been handled with care, and it wasn't. That is not your failure. The lesson Morgan learned, the one she carried out of that Callaway Partners buildic on the day the offer came, was not about revenge. It was not about winning. It was about this. You do not have to be louder than the people who try to dim you. You just have to keep going, quietly, consistently, with your head down and your standard high, until the work speaks so clearly that no whisper, no phone call, no lie told in the right ear can be heard over it. Keep going, rebuild when you have to, and walk back through every door that was closed on you, not to prove a point, but to prove to yourself that you were never as small as someone else needed you to be. If this story moved you, if it made you feel something real, I want to hear from you right now. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Your city, your state, your country. It genuinely matters to us here at Tessa Stories. We read every single one. We want to know who's in this community with us. And if you haven't subscribed yet, please do it right now. Not for the numbers, because there is another story coming that starts exactly where this one left off. And if this one kept you watching, the next one will have you forgetting to breathe. We'll see you there.